Coming up, the ancient art of manual transmission mastery. How to do this like you really mean it.
On the brakes, here we go.
In this report, how to be a proper cog-swapping Yoda, a ratio-changing Jedi. This is the beginner's guide to heel and toe downshifting like a ninja with full race driving, tumescence and pike. Yes! I'm John Cadogan from autoexpert.com.au, the place where Aussie new car buyers save thousands off their next new cars. Hit me up on the website for that. So, it's not looking good for the manual transmission, is it? The fat lady could be on in 5. The doctors are poised in a sinister clutch. Hey, you see what I did there? Life support imminently to be switched off, perhaps. But that doesn't mean we don't still romanticise shifting gears in the old-fashioned way. Some of us, at least. Racing-style heel and toe downshifts are the pinnacle of manual driving mastery, at least in my view. They're hard to learn, but quite easy to do. It's all about the software upstairs and the muscle memory down there. It's about overcoming a systematic deficiency in the nature of downshifting with a manual gearbox, the inherent prejudice in the fundamental design which favours the upshift. If you're one of the increasingly anorexic number of people who can drive a manual, that's a stick if you're in America, then you've probably noticed a big difference between upshifting and downshifting on the difficulty scale. At least you probably noticed that when you learnt how to drive. Upshifting, going into a taller gear, much easier. Downshifting, a whole lot harder. And that's because of an inbuilt systematic difference between those processes. You know, even though the driver does ostensibly the same things during an upshift and a downshift, you put your foot on the clutch, you decouple the transmission, you get off the gas, and engine RPMs fall. Now this is exactly what you want during an upshift, because when you re-engage the transmission by lifting off the clutch in a higher gear, you want the engine to be at a lower RPM state, because that's how this works. And synchronously, the whole powertrain is very happy when you do that. During a downshift, however, engine RPMs still fall when you lift off the gas, and that's exactly what you don't want when you re-engage the transmission, because in a lower gear you want the engine to be at a higher RPM state. And I guess you could solve this problem by consulting the genetic engineers and organising a miraculous new third leg to operate the throttle during a downshift. You could use new leg to give the throttle a bit of a blip, and then everyone would be happy. I wouldn't be banking on medical science helping us out in that respect anytime soon. So, instead, what I'd suggest you do if you want to get really good at downshifting, and in particular, really good at downshifting under pressure, I'd suggest you learn to multitask with your right leg. And basically what you can do then is a double-declutch maneuver, which is essentially a change into neutral in between the downshift and a rev when the powertrain, when that gearbox is re-engaged. So you change into neutral, you give the whole thing a rev briefly, and then you change into the next lower gear. And that rev into neutral gets the engine RPMs up, and it also takes a little bit of load off the synchromesh by getting the whole gear train spinning as well. So everyone can be happy when you do this. Unfortunately, you need to multitask that right leg, and that means you need to brake with the ball of your foot, and you need to roll the outside edge of your right foot over and blip the throttle at the same time. Now, I gotta say, when you're learning to do this, this is degree of difficulty 9.8. But after a while, when you've done it a few thousand times, like I just did one then, it's really easy. And it's also quite satisfying because you can feel the whole powertrain going, oh, thank you for making that so easy for me. For ordinary driving, you probably don't need to know how to do this. You know, in traffic, it's not such a disadvantage not being able to shift back to a lower gear at reasonably high revs, at least not being able to achieve this easily or in some dignified way. But if you're interested in performance driving, and I don't mean driving like an absolute tool on a public road, I mean being able to make your car perform up to the limits of its capabilities safely and responsibly, then you really do need to know this. It's kind of like a pilot knowing how to fly a loop or a stall turn. You don't generally do that for kicks at cruising altitude while the hosties are out there in the back serving breakfast to all the paying customers. But, knowing how to do this deep down, hardwired, like riding a bike, it makes you a better pilot. And I reckon this is that with driving. If you're braking on the way into a bend, the speed and the engine revs are falling. And when you negotiate the bend, you clip the apex and then you need to start applying power and unwinding the steering. At some point, you want a significant amount of acceleration, depending on how much traction you have underfoot. And the only way to deliver a lot of acceleration is with a lot of engine power, and that only occurs at high RPMs. So you need to be in a suitably low gear, and that means you need to downshift at reasonably high revs on the way into that bend. So you need to brake on the way in, right, and downshift and get the revs up by blipping the throttle. And if you want to do this like a proper manual driving ninja, you blip during a double-declutch move while braking, effectively blipping the engine with the clutch engaged, that means with your foot off the clutch, while you're in neutral. You need to operate all three pedals contemporaneously and independently to do this, and you need to do all of the normal spatial perception stuff that cornering demands. You do it like this.
On the brakes, here we go.
The process is on the brakes, double-declutch, rev into neutral, select the lower gear and be at the right revs. Here we go. Fifth back to fourth. Slightly tighter bend coming up this time, so we're up in the revs now, 4.5 in fourth, back to third, here we go. Dead simple. Geez, that feels good when it goes in well. Back into fourth, here we go, braking into a tight right-hander, into third, double-declutch with the brakes. Braking again, balancing it on the way around, up into fourth, and getting ready for another tight right-hander. On the brakes, the blip, into third, round we go. And of course, you don't have to be going like an absolute maniac on a public road to enjoy getting this right. We're doing, 6.5, 7 out of 10 at the moment in fourth gear, coming up for a tight left-hander on the brakes, blip into third, and around we go. At the right revs, 4.5 on the way out. That's really good for putting the power down, and it just feels so satisfying because you can go with the flow as opposed to trying to drag those revs up in some undignified way using the clutch. Here we go again, back to third and around. It really does feel so nice when you get that right because the gear shifter is practically pulled out of your hand. The gearbox and the drivetrain is so willing to adopt those higher revs. It's the only way to fly if you really enjoy driving a manual. Learning this is quite hard because there are so many moving parts. There's the usual demands of cornering, getting the speed and the steering right, plus the brake manoeuvre without which you are potentially not getting around the bend. And then there's the multitasking with the right foot, which does take some getting used to, the rev matching and the double declutching, all happening at once. Nobody does this perfectly out of the blocks the first time. It just doesn't happen. It's enough to give you an intracranial bleed. At least that's how it felt to me. The only other thing I've had to learn that was this demanding in real time was panel operating and presenting in a radio studio, which is kind of like heel and toeing for 6 hours straight. But at least, I guess, if you crash there, the studio doesn't end up torn in half by a tree. So there's that. So my strong advice here is not to learn this while barreling into a tight right-hander at 100 k's an hour or something. Complete cognitive overload if you try that, and way too risky. And you don't want that. So you best break it down. You start with the engine off in the driveway. You practice the physical moves, the hands and the feet, the positive engagement with the brake. Then you declutch and you shift to neutral. You roll over and blip the throttle while you maintain that positive brake engagement. You come off the throttle as you declutch again and you shift down. Your foot comes off the clutch, you gently off the brake, gently onto the gas, and at this point you imagine the apex just flashing past. You get more acceleration, you unwind the steering, it feels really good once you get it right. It doesn't matter if the first one of these takes 3 or 4 minutes to get right in the driveway, or if you have to read these moves off a checklist. It's like anything else complex. You just do it thousands of times and it becomes muscle memory. You're only burning time investing in training stopped in the driveway. Then when you've got these moves down, okay, you go out onto the road and you practice in a nice, quiet, and above all, safe location, in a straight line. You run up to cruising speed and then you gently heel and toe back from fourth to third and then third to second. Gently and slowly. You get a feel for the process and synchronizing the revs and braking in a controlled way. And you keep checking the rear view mirror for traffic approaching from behind, because it can be quite disconcerting for some poor bastard to roll up on you and he's not going to know what you're doing. So take it easy on him. If you're doing this kind of thing for the first time, then there's a few different ways you could get it wrong, and none of them are particularly appealing. Most of them have to do with this new assignment that you're giving your right leg, because you're asking it to do two things contemporaneously, and it could slip one way or the other. You know, you could botch the brakes or you could botch the blip on the throttle. And in the domain of consequences, these are definitely not equal botches, because if you botch the brakes in a motor racing context, you're coming off the track because your mission is to get around that bend at the limit of that car's adhesion. And if you botch the brake maneuver, you'll be going too fast, you're not going to get around. In a street driving context, it can be even more serious, because let's not forget, on a racetrack, there's a singular design predisposition to eliminating hard things to hit at the side of the track. And this is not the case with the street. There's a lot of hard things you can hit at the side of every road. There are power poles and there are trees and there's a cliff you could go down or an embankment you could roll over. None of that is good. There's also the small matter of vulnerable road users. There are pedestrians and cyclists and motorcyclists and all kinds of people who are not expecting you to come off during the negotiation of a bend. If you botch the blip on the throttle, that's not nearly so bad. You know, you will live to fight another day on the track or on the street. So I would strongly recommend that if you're having a crack at heel and toe gear shifting and also gear shifting, if you're having a crack at that, then you must ensure positive engagement with the brake pedal. And if you have to make something sacrificial, make it the blip on the throttle, because the alternative is unthinkable. Remember above all else that the goal here is to go smooth, not fast. And you get to smooth by going slow. It's entirely counterintuitive. But this is okay, because at the risk of sounding like friggin' Yoda, slow is smooth and smooth gets fast. You get fast by going slow and smooth. That's just how processes like this work. And I guarantee if you spend about 20 hours practicing this skill, you will find yourself on the way into some bend at 3,000 revs in third, and that heel and toe move will just slam out of nowhere and the gear lever will slip effortlessly into second. You'll clip the apex at 4,000 revs and it will feel awesome. And the bad news is that in order to feel this way, you'll need to feel like an uncoordinated spastic for about 3 or 4 hours, plus another 3 or 4 of feeling like you'll never be able to get this right, as is the case with anything worth learning. So good luck with that. Remember to prioritise that positive brake engagement above all else if you know what's good for you. And if I can do it, anyone can. Well, almost anyone. I'm John Cadogan. I hope this helps. Thanks for watching.